Welcome back to the second part of solving using the quadratic formula. This is the pre-AP section for deriving the quadratic formula. So a lot of people think math doesn't really make sense because they're like, well, where does this even come from? Like, who comes up with this stuff? Well, honestly, it just starts off with something basic, and then they get to a formula, or they get to some type of property or concept or law, you know? So it's not like everything just like magically falls out of someone's head. It comes from something. So we're going to derive the quadratic formula, and you're going to start with your standard form. You're going to start with a standard form quadratic. Now, in order to derive, we need to use the process of completing the square. Okay? Smiley face. Okay. I know it's not going to be the prettiest thing, but I did teach you completing the square before this, so we should know how to know like the basic concepts of completing the square. So the first step of completing the square is actually to move your c over, but completing the square works best when a is 1. And right now a is just a. Okay, I want it to be 1. There's not a 1 there, there's an a there. So I need to divide out an a from all of my terms here. Okay, because what if a is 3? What if a is 5, right? We don't know what a is, so you want to divide it out. So you have x squared plus, okay, and if b is like 3 and a is 2, then you would have 3 over 2. So here you'd have b over a x plus c over a equals, and then 0 divided by a, or 0 divided by any number, is just 0. Okay, now don't write too big because we are going to probably take up this entire page. That's why I gave you a whole page to do it. Next part of completing the square, I want all of my variables on the left, all of my constants on the right. So I'm going to subtract c over a on both sides. Okay, so I have x squared plus b over a x equals negative c over a. And then here is where I add my blanks. I put in my missing blanks here that I need to fill in. Plus blank equals negative c over a plus blank. All right. Now, do we remember what goes in those blanks? Remember, we take our b divided by 2 and square it. So we know it's going to be b divided by 2 and square it. Well, my b in this case is b over a, so it's kind of nasty looking. So we have b divided by a over 2 squared, right? Because this is our b, right? It's whatever is attached to the x. So let's first divide it by 2, okay? Now, that means I have b divided by 2 divided by 2. Now, I don't know if you remember how to divide fractions, but I use the term keep, change, flip. So we're going to keep the first fraction. We're going to change the sign, and we're going to flip the next one. Technically, I have 2 over 1, so I'm going to flip it and get 1 over 2. And then, so I end up having, oh, I forgot my a. This should be an a. What is going on? Okay, a. There we go. B divided by a divided by 2. There we go. That looks way more better. I was like, what is going on? All right, so, sorry, I just wrote it 2 instead of an a. So you should have b over 2a, okay? Now, next I have to do is I have to square it. So this would equal b over 2a, and I have to square that because I'm just plugging that in here. And that ends up being b squared over 4a squared, okay? That goes in my blank. I know, super not pretty. But, you know, that's kind of math sometimes. You have a lot of, like, work, but you end up getting this, like, really cool thing at the very end. It's going to pay off. When we get that quadratic formula at the end, we're going to be like, wow, looks pretty cool. All right, so the next step I'm going to do, remember, after you complete the square, after you make it a perfect square trinomial, you're going to factor the left side, and you're going to simplify the right side. Now, first I'm going to factor this side. And I know since it's a perfect square trinomial, I'm going to have x and then something and then squared, because it's going to be two things that are exactly the same. Now, you're like, well, I'm like, well, what's going to go in that spot? Like, I don't know what to put there. Well, remember that shortcut I showed you. Whatever's in the parentheses when you were doing your b divided by 2 squared is going to go in the parentheses in the sorry, I'm like blanking out, in the binomial. So you're going to have positive b over 2a in this one. So you're going to have that. So what's in green there is the same. So same process, looks way uglier than it was yesterday or the day before. Equals, now I need to simplify the other side. But I can't add two things that don't have a common denominator. So I need to go over here and make a common denominator. Now the common denominator for both of these would be 4a squared, right? Because I can't get 4a squared to become a, but I can get my a over here to become 4a squared. So I'm going to look at this. So I have that. So I need to multiply it by something to get it to be 4a squared in the bottom. So in order to get this a to become 4a squared, I'm going to multiply it by 4a, but I have to multiply it by 4a over 4a because it's 1 technically. And this would equal negative 4ac all over 4a squared. Okay? So let me go ahead and fill that in over here. And then rewrite this guy plus b squared 4a squared. Okay. I'm trying to color code for you guys like I usually do so that we kind of know what we're doing here. Now I'm going to simplify that right side. So I'm going to copy this down. Okay, and I'm going to simplify this over here. Now it looks like this, and then you have it all over 4a squared. Because now I can add them. So I guess I'll just leave it like that for now. Not a big deal. And then the next thing I'm going to do, hopefully we're starting to recognize some things. And actually, hopefully we'll recognize it after this step. So I'll go ahead and show you something. Let me rewrite this part here. I'm going to reorder these two. I'm going to put the b squared in the front. Do you notice anything familiar yet? This is our discriminant. This is from our quadratic formula. B squared minus 4ac. That's in our quadratic formula. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root. So after we've simplified and factored, the next step in completing the square is taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root, and so all I have left is x plus b divided by 2a equals, remember when we square root, we always have two solutions, so plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. Okay? Now, what property did we learn that we could split up a radical like this? Well, I know that I can take, or since I have a fraction underneath, I can split my radical into two parts. So we have x plus b over 2a, and I have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. Okay? Now, I can actually simplify this bottom one. I can take the square root of 4, and I can take the square root of a squared. So the square root of 4a squared is, whoops, not 4. It is 2a. Okay? Hopefully we're starting to see it take form here. So I have x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over our 2a. Okay, so things are starting to look very familiar, hopefully. And then the last thing I need to do is get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract b over 2a on both sides. Now remember, when I subtract, I like to keep it in the front, so I'm going to put that in the front, negative b over 2a, and then I have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Lastly, I have the same denominator, so I can combine the fractions. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We did it! We freaking derived the quadratic formula. So that was pretty cool. Draw a little smiley face here and draw a little hair. Yeah, there we go. We did it. So if you want to look at like the big picture, we did all that. We started from the standard form of a quadratic formula, we completed the square, and we derived it. And it's very beautiful and ugly at the same time. But yeah, if you have any questions about all of this, please feel free to come in for tutorials if you need some help.